I'm Aaron Mate, sitting in for Jimmy Dore, here with Misha Pollan and Americans comedian Kurt Metzger. This happened recently, this intercepted drone attack on the Kremlin. There it is. Now, the Kremlin immediately accused Ukraine of being responsible for this and trying to assassinate Vladimir Putin. How are U.S. officials and U.S. experts responding? Well, they're convinced it was a false flag. Here's the headline from CNBC. False flag. Analysts say Russia likely staged Kremlin drone attack it blamed on Ukraine and the West.
Is this going to say what Russia gets out of this false flag? And will it be what I guessed when we talked about this on Wednesday?
I think, yes, it's going to match pretty closely. We're going to hear from a lot of people.
I'm a stuttering idiot, but I get it. All right, let's see.
Here's Fox News. Alleged Putin assassination is a false flag orchestrated to bolster Russia's war effort, experts claim. And one of those supposed experts is retired General Jack Keane. He's with a group called the Institute for the Study of War. It's a neocon think tank in Washington. And they are convinced that this is a Russian false flag.
Why? Because they go, it's what we would do, like with George W. Bush and Saddam trying to kill Daddy. And that's what we would do. So obviously, they're worse.
Well, we've looked at this at the Institute for the Study of War, and we've concluded that Russia's conducting a false flag operation here. For our audience, that means that they created this incident themselves. And why do we come to that conclusion? I mean, it doesn't fit Ukraine's pattern of behavior at all. First of all, there's little or no damage, and Ukraine would be absolutely seeking damage. Number two.
So Ukraine would have been more destructive if they had done it? Wait, hold on. Is that a good argument? They did blow up those civilians in a cafe. Does that lend to the argument that it's not them because it wasn't so murderous?
Yeah, but every time you carry out an attack, you can't guarantee how it's going to go. And this was an attack right on the Kremlin where if it had succeeded, it could have been pretty murderous.
So just go for it.
Yeah.
I initially thought Ukraine was doing it because hopefully it'll provoke things because he's clearly said World War III is worth it.
I agree with that.
We can't, people are starting to lose interest. I think they had a lot to begin with. And they must sense that there.
Yes, I think that's plausible. But again, Jack Keane is convinced it's a false flag.
I mean, hitting the top of the Senate dome appears to be well framed for filming, which it clearly was.
Okay, it was well framed for filming because by that point, Russia had already intercepted another drone. And so they were, I think, perceiving more attacks coming. And there was even actually somebody on the roof of the building in defense. And the person's obviously not there to help stage the attack because if you're staging an attack, you're not putting someone there on the building where everybody can see.
Hey, we got some great shots on 9/11 as well. Real amazing ones.
As opposed to destruction. And thirdly, the Russians came out very quickly with this is an attack and an assassination attempt by the Ukrainians on Vladimir Putin. When it's well known, Senator Cotton is absolutely right that Putin doesn't sleep in the Kremlin. He works in the Kremlin unless there's some kind of crisis going on and he's going to stay overnight. And that was clearly not taking place here.
Okay, so because Putin wasn't sleeping there that night, that means that Ukraine wasn't trying to hit him if he were there, or even if he weren't there, hit a Kremlin building, which is a huge symbol of Russia's power. It would make sense that Ukraine would have other reasons to try to hit this building other than trying to kill Vladimir Putin.
You know what's so funny? The clip, I remember watching it, it looks like such of a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like if this was a 50s UFO movie, it would look like bad special effects. The real explosion of a drone is not impressive.
No, it's not. No. But imagine if a similar explosion happened at Congress or the White House.
Yeah, I don't know the claim. Yeah, I know. Well, how about those pipe bombs on January 6th and nobody knows they came from or bothered to investigate afterwards and didn't go off. And AOC to go in a closet hearing about it 2 weeks later.
So what's really happening here? What is the motivation of Russia to do that? Well, we don't know for sure, but we can speculate that it likely has to do with 9 May that's coming up, which is their celebration of their victory over Germany and the Nazis in World War II. Huge amount of casualties there, 22 to 25 million, depending on who's reporting it. But there's staggering casualties in Ukraine. And the people are becoming more and more aware of the toll that this is taking on the young people in Russia. And that's the reality of it. And this is a way to distract the people, the domestic audience, from that focus. And
wow, I can't believe they were inventing ideas so evil. To use World War II. At least when they're exploiting World War II to go, once again, fight Nazis, they're not fighting with actual Nazis. At least they have the balls to do that, to compare this to World War II, except we're fighting with Nazis.
Exactly. And look, if you look at Russian polls, if you can believe them, which I think you can, they show the majority of the population does support Putin's war effort, whether people here agree with it or not. He does have domestic support. I don't think he needs to stage an attack on the Kremlin, which makes him look pretty weak. The fact that you can let this happen, an attack on the Kremlin, I don't think he needs that to manufacture support from the Russian public.
Yeah, we did sanctions on them to create that.
There you go, exactly.
Like how remember how Saddam got a lot more popular after our sanctions?
Yeah, and a lot more powerful.
Stay and blame the United States as well. That fits into the narrative right from the very beginning, and also the narrative that Putin has been carrying on for years, Sandra, that it's the United States and the West who are encroaching on Russia, not the opposite.
Now, why would Russia think that the U.S. and the West are encroaching on Russia when they've expanded a hostile military alliance right to their borders over the last 30 years? NATO continue to expand right to Russia's borders.
Also,
why would they think that?
Quite a downgrade in their false flags from blowing up their own Keystone pipeline deep under the sea. You opened with that false flag, and then this was your closer?
And this is why I'm going to war in Ukraine, because there's Nazi genocide taking place there, supported by the United States and the West. Yeah, this is, I think, what is really happening here.
All right. That's Jack Keane with his theory on why this is a false flag. Here is Trump's former national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, with his theory.
Well, it has the hallmarks of a Russian false flag operation. And keep in mind that's for a couple of reasons. One, the Russians just launched a massive drone attack on civilians in Ukraine, and they've been roundly criticized for it. And I think this is maybe their way of trying to say, oh no, the Ukrainians did this to us as well.
You think Russia cares that they're roundly criticized in the West for killing civilians? I think at this point Russia's
over. I think it's getting to Putin. I mean, that's unbelievable. They're like, oh, they're just trying to get us, the people who would totally have sympathy if it was real.
Like Putin saw someone on MSNBC denouncing him for killing civilians, and he realized he needed to manufacture do something to win their sympathy.
How many things
a drone strike on himself?
The Russian playbook that you would think is about this thick with all the classic Russian plays going on, and then you find out they're all none of Russians. It's about this much in their playbook, I think.
Number two, it's inconsistent with the way the Ukraine has fought the war so far. I mean, Ukraine could engage in guerrilla activity in Moscow and other major Russian cities. It has not done so.
What?
It's had limited attacks in the Russian Federation, just limited to power stations on the border.
No, they also bombed a Russian airbase.
On this very channel, they talked about how they killed that guy's daughter, and pretty cool that happened.
Yeah.
And also, they blew up that cafe, and that's pretty. I thought that's already out there, not classified.
It is. They killed the daughter of Alexander Dugin in a car bombing. They bombed that cafe with a pro-Russian military blogger. They blew him up, and they've launched drone attacks on air bases that house nuclear-capable bombers. So it's not as if Ukraine's done these minor attacks inside of Russia.
Which, again, they deny. So this is inconsistent with how Ukraine has fought the war. And number three, if they were trying to make a splash and hit the Kremlin or assassinate Vladimir Putin, this is based on the photos that we're watching. It's a small drone with a small conventional charge. And the Kremlin's a massive facility. For those of you've been there, Bill, Dana. It's a massive facility. Hitting it with a small drone with a limited conventional charge wasn't going to kill Vladimir Putin or do any real damage to the Kremlin. So it's hard to believe.
It is embarrassing to the Kremlin, though. I mean, even if that's true that it couldn't have killed Putin or someone else, it's pretty embarrassing that the Kremlin could allow a drone to hit the Kremlin. I mean, this is like the seat of power. So this does do damage, actually, to Russia.
Oh, yeah. If Iraq landed a weak-ass drone near the White House, that alone is an insult, is it not?
When China had their weather balloon fly over Iowa, this country freaked out for a couple of weeks. Blinken canceled his trip to China.
Aaron, I forgot Balloonuary 6th already until you just reminded me.
Never forget.
Never
January
forget
6th.
January 6th.
Never forget.
The Ukrainians would have risked the backlash of that sort of an attack. So I would take, this is one time when I'll agree with Secretary Blinken that you can take this with a grain of salt from the Russians.
All right, and here's former Defense Secretary and CIA Chief Leon Panetta also saying that this is a false flag.
And former CIA Director under President Obama, Leon Panetta. Secretary Panetta, sources tell CNN that U.S. officials had no warning that an attack like this was coming and that the Ukrainians assure them privately they had nothing to do with it. What's your take?
Jake, this really does smell like a false flag operation on the part of the Russians.
It smells like a false flag.
Hey, can you open a window?
A diversion, if you will. And if somebody was really trying to make an effort at an assassination attempt, it was pretty far-fetched. I've been to the Kremlin. The Kremlin is a fortress, and Putin doesn't exactly take walks around the Kremlin. There's no Rose Garden at the Kremlin. So this is clearly an allegation that is false. I don't think there's a lot of truth to it. And at most, it probably is one of these diversionary things that kind of marks the beginning of the spring offensives that we're going to see pretty soon.
So, yeah, that was going to be my next question. If this is indeed a false flag, is this...
So I just love that they're entertaining the possibility that this is a false flag. Meanwhile, whenever the U.S. and their allies are accused of false flags, that is dismissed as a conspiracy theory. For example, the Duma incident in Syria, when the Syrian government was accused of a chemical attack, and
That's
then
preposterous.
well, and then
This is why you're getting put on this.
people pointed out that the sectarian death squad rebels had every motivation to launch a false flag because that would trigger U.S. airstrikes, which it did, and then that was backed up by the OPCW whistleblower incident, where whistleblowers inside the OPCW, challenged the cover-up of their own investigation, which showed that actually there was no evidence of a chemical attack. So when people like us point that out, we get accused of being conspiracy theorists. In this case, because the alleged perpetrator of a false flag is a bad guy government, totally fine for CNN to air this and for former defense officials to speculate this as well.
Do you think Russia trying to create some sort of justification for further nihilistic barbarism? Not that they need it, really. I mean, they've been doing it now for more than a year anyway.
Don't negate your own fake argument, dude.
Wait a second, my theory
It
makes
doesn't
no
even
sense.
make sense. So could it be? Is it so the whatever they get that thing to show they can get it into get past whatever to get near the Kremlin?
Yeah.
And it's an embarrassment to Putin
Yeah.
that Ukraine to do that. So is it much like like January 6th? Like they almost overthrew the whole government. So Putin goes, they tried to kill me.
Yeah,
Because
sure.
otherwise, just it's an embarrassing lapse where they were able to get a drone in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, but it clearly follows the Putin playbook here.
Oh my
which is,
dear God!
Putin playbook. There you have it.
I feel like I'm on Sesame Street. He looks like a Muppet. And I'm going to read the Putin playbook.
Anything possible that suits U.S. interests is in the Putin-Russian playbook. That's the definition of the Putin-Russian playbook. That's why Leon Panetta was among the people who signed that letter saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was likely a Russian propaganda operation. Because anything that embarrasses the U.S. or that goes against U.S. interests, that can just be dismissed as a Russian operation.
What's his? I'm forgetting his name.
Jake Tapper.
I keep calling him Ed Helms. Did you see how Jake Tapper, his look of seriousness?
Oh,
That's how you act with Muppets. If you ever have to act, people don't want to act with puppets. You got to play it dead straight, like how he's doing, right? And then this dude pops out of the garbage can with the lid on his head. Oh, it's the Martian playbook. He's like, all right. Something to think about. You gotta look at the.
To create these kinds of false diversions in order to justify some kind of action that they're going to take. I don't know what that action would be. They're sending a lot of drones over Ukraine. They're sending a lot of missiles over the Ukraine. I don't know what additionally the Russians could do at this point that they're not doing now. But having said that, I think that the Ukrainians probably are engaging in some diversions themselves. in Ukraine to try to make sure that the Russians don't quite know where they're going to show up in terms of their offensive. And I'm sure the Russians are now doing the same. We're going to see a lot of that as we work up to what I think is without question going to be a spring offensive, certainly by the Ukrainians and possibly by the Russians as well.
That was the most remarkably candid I've seen one of them be, like with the least amount of, like the least amount of one-sided crap. That's actually amazing that you were here told that.
Here's Michael Tracy. He points out none of these false flags ever happened. Fortunately, war hysteria entitles everyone to spew a nonstop geyser of BS. And so these are all these previous times when the U.S. has claimed that Russia was going to launch a false flag, but it didn't pan out. So this is back in February. Russia planning false flag attacks on the eve of Ukraine war anniversary. ISW. And who's the ISW? That's the Institute for the Study of War, which is the group that Jack Keane, that general we saw on Fox News, that he is a part of. So that was wrong. Okay, here's one from February 2022. U.S. says new intel shows Russia plotting false flag attack. Didn't happen. Here's another one. Russia planning false flag attacks on ally Belarus to drag it into the war. Ukrainian intelligence. So there's a history of Russia being accused of false flags that do not actually pan out.
How do you even believe it after you hear U.S. intel says, like after you get lied to this many times, and then to go Ukrainian intel told us that? I mean, what's that worth?
Well, Kurt, what do you see this graphic that the U.S. government made to convince you that Ukraine is being falsely framed? Look at this graphic.
We have all the data. Wait. What's happening?
This is from the U.S. government, from the U.S. Embassy in the U.K., how Russia conducts false flag operations.
That's not the whole thing, though.
That's Russia. that is Russia.
But they're not saying that. Okay, I'm not for real because I don't know. This is not being portrayed as some kind of graph. It's just the picture for the article.
What I'm saying is you are convinced by this? This is the Russian government with a mask of Ukraine on.
Oh, I thought they made like a peace deal with a new flag.
That's pretty good, though.
They will come in the mask of Ukraine and threaten to kill Roger Waters.
Here is another former defense official in UK on Sky News.
So if it was Russia, why?
Two main reasons probably that would answer that why question, one of which is most military analysts think Russia is struggling on the battlefields, will be pushed back by Ukraine in the spring offensive, and therefore expecting some sort of false flag operation within Russia which would justify pulling their military resources back to the homeland to actually defend Russian population and therefore justify proactively why they bring it back in. But also the Victory Day celebration is on the 9th of May. At the moment, that's marking the Russian victory over Nazi Germany. Several of the local parades have actually been cancelled, ostensibly because the Russian power thinks they don't have the crowds being vulnerable to attack from Ukraine, which seems highly implausible. But most likely it's because of the immortal regiments. These are normal Russians who walk along as part of the parade, carrying pictures of the loved ones that they've lost in a war. If they were joined on that parade by people who've lost loved ones in Ukraine, then that could significantly enhance the crowds and could actually expose the huge numbers of losses that Russia sustained on the battlefield. That's not something the Russian authorities will have wanted. So the explosion could justify cancelling the parade.
Hold on, the whole reason they pushed it, that's crazy. Their whole psychology is like, yeah, we're celebrating how we lost a bunch of people fighting Nazis. Yeah. They're currently fighting Nazis. Yeah. That's going to hype people up for war more. That's how they do it, right?
Exactly. It makes no sense, but that's the thing. When you're accusing an official enemy of something, you can say anything, and you don't need to have logic.
That's profoundly stupid. Like, I'm not even an expert on Russia, but obviously they don't have the same mentality.
Yeah.
If they have a holiday centered around we lost how many people? Like 9.4 million?
At least 25 million.
25 million people. Yeah. We celebrate that every year because we beat the Nazis. And it just so happens, we had to pretend the Bath Party were really drive. They used to kind of know Nazis back in the day. We're fighting Nazis.
Yeah,
we had to fake that. Yeah. They have real Nazis they can do it with.
Exactly. And if Russia wanted to cancel those parades, it could just say there's a safety threat, which there is. There have been attacks inside Russia recently, like in that cafe, the car bombing of Alexander Dugin's daughter. There's plenty of things Russia could say to justify canceling public events. I don't think they need to make themselves look weak by staging an attack on themselves in the Kremlin to make that happen. Anything is possible, of course, but it's just so funny how everyone leaps to embracing false flags when an official enemy is being accused of them. When U.S. and its allies are accused of false flags, it has to be a conspiracy theory.
I don't think there's like any self-awareness of how people look at us at all. You know, like, oh, Iran, they're probably ready to become an American vassal state because they're having a march. I'm sure they